One day, I found a receipt for a luxury brand bag for women in my husband's coat pocket. Our wedding anniversary was coming up, so at first, I was so excited because I thought the bag was going to be for me. However, that very evening, we had a big fight that left us both a little cold and distant towards each other. And we spent days in an awkward atmosphere at home. Our anniversary came and went, and he never gave me a present at all, let alone an expensive bag. I began to suspect my husband of having an affair and hired a detective agency to investigate his behavior. The results came back fraught with the rawest guilt. I immediately consulted my in-laws, and together, we forged a plan that would punish him well for his betrayal. Later, my husband lied about going on a business trip, and instead left for a trip of adultery. The day he left home for the trip, he called me on the phone to remind me.
Don't forget to take care of Mom and Dad when they arrive when I'm gone, okay?
I don't have to take care of them.
What?
They're both right there with you, silly. The next thing I heard was my father-in-law's furious voice and my husband's surprised voice over the phone. I revealed everything to my now bewildered husband and bestowed his judgment upon him. This is the story of how I discovered my husband was having an affair and how I was able to get back at him for betraying me with the much-needed help of my in-laws. I'm Riley, and I'm a 28-year-old president of a local bathroom products company. My husband Romano and I have been married for 3 years, but we had no children as of the beginning of the story. To be honest, at my age, many people around me were starting to raise children. Some of my closest colleagues at work actually quit their job because they were going to become housewives. However, I had my own reasons for wanting to wait until a little later to have children of my own. The reason was because my business's performance was on the rise and that it was landing very important contracts right around then. Put in a good way, I'm an independent businesswoman. Put it in a bad way, I don't like to be told what to do. Because he knew I was passionate about my job, he agreed with the idea that I keep working, and I took his word for it and continued to work. While everything seemed all in well, there was one thing that worried me: my in-laws. I told my parents-in-laws that I would only quit my job if there was absolutely no other choice. But they didn't seem to understand what I meant exactly. They had been telling me since the beginning of our marriage that, you can quit if things get hard, You can live on Romano's income alone, can't you? I know they are not bad people, but we didn't see eye to eye on our ways of thinking about my work. It's still the same now as it was in the beginning of my marriage to Romano, and quitting my job started coming up in conversation at every possible opportunity. Whether it was the proximity of my in-laws' house, or the fact that they had not yet grown apart from their son, I'll never know. But they used to visit our house every weekend to have dinner with us, and they sometimes said some things that interfered with my life, in a way. My mother-in-law was particularly insistent. Why is your laundry basket full, Riley? I'll do it for you. Oh no, Mrs. LeCans, you don't need to do that. I worked late yesterday, so I was going to do it today anyway. Oh, I see. You can quit your job if the housework is too much for you, My job is very rewarding, ma'am. I don't want to quit just now. Okay. You do know I'm saying that because I'm thinking of you and Romano's future, I hope. Ha. There was more I wanted to say back, but I knew it wouldn't do any good to argue here. Besides, I knew Mrs. LeCans didn't mean anything bad by what she said. The more obvious that truth was, the more frustrated I became over the fact that she didn't seem to understand me. And what was somewhat worse was that at around that time, Romano himself neither encouraged her to pressure me, nor stopped her from pressuring me. Can't you tell your mother to lay off on her concern about my job? I don't like it when she reminds me I have the option of quitting my job every time I see her. I once tried to tell him so, but his reply was quite useless.
It's none of my business, Riley. So why don't you do something about it yourself? Personally, I'm not complaining about your job. I mean, I'm not saying anything that could be pressuring you into quitting, right?
I was so discouraged by this irresponsible answer that I gave up on relying on him for anything that had to do with this particular problem. Meanwhile, Romano started working overtime more and more often, and we had fewer and fewer opportunities to talk. I was too busy with work myself to pay much attention to this, but one day, as our 4th wedding anniversary approached, I suddenly realized something. Up until then, we had always planned a celebration for this special day every year. But this year, we hadn't talked about anything at all. I decided that I wanted to spend some quality time together as a couple on this day, as we've been doing for 3 consecutive years. So I came home and made the suggestion to my husband. Next week is our anniversary, right? Why don't you come home early and have a nice dinner together, relax a little, and maybe watch a movie? Then he exclaimed as though he had just remembered it was our special day.
Shit, you're right. We hadn't talked about anything this year, have we? I've been so busy lately. I don't know if I can come home early then, Riley.
Are you in charge of something big?
You can put it that way, sure.
Can't you go home on time just for our anniversary? I mean, it is our anniversary after all.
I don't know if it's possible. The fact remains, I'm very busy.
Oh, well, he didn't give me any more details and went to take a shower. I didn't want to ask him any more questions because I myself don't like it when people who have no business doing so meddle in my own affairs. I was very disappointed and frankly quite depressed that Romano didn't seem to put in any effort to spend the day together. I could only assume he was having a bit of a stressful time with his job, but there was one thing that bothered me a little. It was about his workplace's work policy. Up until the previous year, he used to come home early once a month, saying that that particular day was a no overtime day. But more recently, he'd completely stopped talking about that. I had forgotten about it all, but come to think of it, I didn't remember hearing him say the words no overtime day for about 6 months by then. But since I often come home late myself, I wasn't sure if he simply stopped telling me when those days were, or if the monthly no overtime day policy itself had been abolished. Nevertheless, this realization left me with a bad feeling in my gut, the kind where something life-changing was probably to happen if I went with the flow. One thing you should know about me. Once something didn't sit right with me, and my intuition is on my mind, it's hard to get rid of it. Part of me wanted to take action as quickly as possible. But not only did I have no idea where to begin, but I also had no clue as to why exactly I was fidgeting over this. Not to mention the fact that it was my overthinking that had gotten the better of me on multiple occasions, when I had this feeling that made me distrust it so much. I called out to Romano when he came back after taking a shower. By the way, are there any no overtime days these days? He replied rather anxiously.
Come to think of it, there haven't really been any recently, have there? Damn, since when did my workplace become so dark?
I see. It must be tough. I felt uncomfortable with his smile. Was I overthinking things again? It would be extremely disrespectful to my husband if I gave the cold shoulder with a suspicious look added in, when, in fact, he really had simply become busier with work. I thought better of it. Before I knew it, this feeling of discomfort had vanished. But unfortunately, as it would become apparent to me later on, it did not take me long to realize that I was right all along. On the day of our anniversary, I left for home on time, even if it was only for myself. I wanted to keep the tradition we had up until then. I even had a special cake prepared to share with my husband when he got home. I went home with light, excited steps, took a shower, prepared dinner, and passed the time in the living room. After such a busy day, coupled with the fact I hardly ever got home until after 9 p.m., I felt that I had nothing to do at this time of the day. So I decided to do some housework that I usually didn't get around to. It was a warm spring day, and neither my husband nor I were wearing coats anymore. So I decided to change our clothes and take them to the dry cleaners. After getting my own coat, I got Romano's and searched through the pockets to get anything inside out. All were empty except one, and it felt like a small piece of paper. I was curious about what was inside, and when I took it out, I found it was a receipt for a luxury brand bag for women that cost over $1,500. Could it be a present for me, today? My heart danced in my chest, but at the same time, I felt sorry that a mere cake from a shop in town was nowhere near a good thank you for such a nice gift for the occasion. I quietly put the coat back on and gave up on the dry cleaning, pretending not to have ever noticed the receipt, and continued to wait for my husband. But he never came home. I looked at the cold cooking on the table and felt pretty lonely for the rest of the night. Around 11 p.m., the front door opened.
I'm home.
Welcome back. You're home late.
I was more busy than usual today.
He took a look at the feast that was on the table and added,
Riley, I ate out today, so I don't need any dinner.
That comment sent a tsunami of mixed emotions over me mercilessly. It's our anniversary today, Romano. I went to the trouble of making something really special for us, and I waited for you until this late at night to eat it. Then my husband had the audacity to look at me coldly.
Well, I sure as hell didn't know you'd go through all these heights knowing I was going to come home late. And believe me, I tried to get home early today, but my boss said it just wasn't going to happen.
It's still our anniversary. We used to celebrate it together.
What's 1 or 2 anniversaries matter, eh? I don't have time for arguing,
He said as he walked out of the living room grumpily. I plopped down onto the couch, very depressed because of all the high expectations I was setting for the occasion. I was genuinely hoping he would surprise me by coming home on time with a brand new handbag, and we would actually enjoy a nice dinner together and celebrate what we had after all. Why did I ever do that to myself? The disappointment and trauma was 10 times worse than it could have been if I didn't overthink things. In this awkward atmosphere, there was no way I could suggest we at least have some cake together. There was no sign of the brand new handbag either. I ate my share of the meal while he showered, put the rest in the fridge, and retired to my room, glum and blah. The next morning, we spent the morning in silence, perpetuating the awkward atmosphere of yesterday's argument. A few weeks passed after that, and still not a single sign of any expensive handbag. And that's when a terrible possibility occurred to me. It wasn't a present for me at all. Once that thought took root, everything Romano had said and done started to make so much sense, it was suspicious. I began to suspect he still had his monthly no overtime day, and he was meeting up with someone else on that same day. I wondered if he had some other plans that were somehow more important to him than his own anniversary with his wife. I couldn't trust him anymore, and I had to find out the truth. But I couldn't afford to lose time at work. The only option I had was to go to a detective agency. A week later, the results came back fraught with the rawest guilt. My husband was indeed having an affair with one of his subordinates. Apparently, he had been complaining that I worked late every day and had no time for him and his wife. And on his monthly no overtime day, he always seemed to have a date with that woman. I was completely appalled. My husband had agreed to let me work, and that meant he was prepared to accept the consequences of potentially busy times for me. I was the president of a company after all, and sometimes it demanded so much from me. I couldn't believe that he had put on the good, innocent face on the surface, and then complained about it behind my back. I was filled with anger at the betrayal of his affair, and the humiliation of his complaining about my job. Divorce was the only solution, I thought. But a simple divorce was not enough to satisfy me. I just had to do something to punish him. A few days later, Romano, who seemed completely unaware of my behind-the-scenes activities, told me,
I'm going on a business trip for about a week, starting Monday, Riley.
"A business trip? At this time of year?" In my 7 years of knowing him, not once did he ever have a business trip in the spring.
It's kind of an urgent matter.
Oh, well, good luck with that.
And by the way, I'm sure Mom and Dad will come over again, so keep them company, if you don't mind. And I got the tickets for that play you suggested you take them to.
Okay. I feigned a genuine smile well in front of Romano, who himself looked somewhat happy. But I knew that this business trip was an outright lie. I knew that this was a blatant lie because this was just the trip of adultery that had been described in the evidence provided to me by the detective agency. The next day, I called my mother-in-law on my lunch break. This was the first time in my 4 years of marriage that I had contacted Mrs. LeCans myself, and she was quite surprised to hear from me and answered within seconds. "What's wrong, Riley?" She was far more caring than I'd imagined, very nearly as much as my own mother. It was a much bigger and better reaction than I had imagined she'd have. "I'd like to talk to you about something." "About what, dear? Is it about Romano?" "Yes, indeed. Could you come over to my house this weekend?" Mrs. LeCans answered curiously. "Of course, but I'm going to need some background, dear. What's going on?" I made up my mind to tell her everything right then and there. Actually, about Romano, I think he's having an affair. She was so surprised that I could literally feel her facial expression through the phone. Without hesitation, I told her the results of the investigation conducted by the detective agency. "I'm so sorry. I will not forgive that son of a bitch." She sniffed as I heard her tears run down her cheeks. Maybe not literally, but her voice was so genuine. It made me realize just how much my parents-in-law really cared about us, and that she really was only saying all those things about quitting my job because she really cared about me. At that moment, I felt as if I had broken free from all the insecurities I had felt regarding her pestering. Where is this trip to? I have an idea. And with one word from my mother-in-law, everything was set in motion. On the day of the business trip, or rather, the trip of adultery, my husband was dressed in a suit and looked no different from when he usually went to work. But his mouth was twisted into a semi-smile, and he was humming quite a joyful tune. Well, you seem to be in a good mood, LOL, I said, to which he replied somewhat shocked.
Am I really? I feel as I usually do. Well, maybe a bit excited. If I do well in this job, I'll be acknowledged well for it, after all.
I see. Good luck with that, I answered with a fake smile, which I'd gotten somewhat better at than previous days. And then he left. I knew not only where he was going, but also the name of the hotel where he was staying. I immediately began to prepare. I picked up my phone and called Mrs. LeCans. Romano just left the house, Bethany. Excellent. We just left too. I'll clue you in on our plan. They'd hunt him down and ambush him at the hotel, and when he couldn't run away with it, my in-laws would reprimand him. Things were going as planned, and Mr. LeCans had just texted me saying they'd arrived in the center of the city, where the hotel was. But just as they were about to arrive at the hotel, I received an unexpected phone call.
Hello?
It was from Romano himself. What's wrong?
I don't think I told you where I put the tickets for that play. Do you see a light blue envelope on the shelf above the living room desk?
I looked, and sure enough, there was an envelope there. The one that has a Snoopy sticker on it?
Yeah, that's the one. Glad we got that sorted. That's all I have to tell you. Take care of Mom and Dad.
I just burst out laughing at the mention of entertaining Mr. and Mrs. LeCans.
What's so funny?
Just that I really don't think I need to take care of them, LOL. They're headed right your way as we speak, LOL. At exactly that instant, I heard Mr. LeCan's furious voice, loud enough to be heard clearly over the phone.
What the frick do you think you're doing?
What the hell? Dad?
I couldn't contain my laughter at the entrance of my in-laws. The timing was ridiculously impeccable. I asked them to sanction your trip of adultery, Romano. LOL.
What the hell do you think you're doing? You're nuts. You are. I'm telling you. I'm here on business. Fiona's a junior colleague of mine.
You must be very close to your junior colleague to call her by her first name. And I have proof of Mr. LeCans.
Proof? Proof of what?
In response to her son's puzzled words, Mrs. LeCans seemed to have shown him something I had given her.
What? Where did you get these photographs?
You can't get away with it now, bucko. Mrs. LeCan's voice sounded much lower and more murderous than usual.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
You think a simple apology is gonna fix everything? As soon as I shouted that, I heard a loud popping sound and Romano screamed.
Ow!
It seemed his father had struck him with a fist to the face. Immediately after that, I heard my in-laws lecturing the hell out of him.
Don't think we're gonna let you get away with this, you freaking gosh damn bastard.
Riley had been working so hard to balance her job and the housework, and this is how you thank her? You stupid asshole. From next to him, I also heard the sobbing voice of the woman named Fiona Hodge. I'm the one who wants to cry, I thought as I said one last thing to my traitorous husband. I'm divorcing you.
Oh, hell no.
Of course she freaking is.
It's just something small. I swear this doesn't mean anything. You're the only one I love. Riley? Please?
I was truly disgusted with Romano for saying such things during this hopeless moment. I've had enough of this. I'm tired of talking to you. I've asked your parents to take care of the rest, so talk to them if you got a frickin' problem. I hung up the phone before he had a chance to stop me. After that, Romano and his lover were severely reprimanded by my in-laws, and he also signed the divorce papers that I had left in their possession. My section was already filled in. Of course, I demanded alimony from both of them. Both Romano and Fiona went deathly pale when they saw the total amount, but they truly ought to be, considering the compensation for committing adultery is insane. Fiona blamed her lover for letting the affair out in the open. Romano retaliated, and the argument got pretty heated, and they broke up on the spot. Fiona quit her job soon after the breakup and went and leaked all the information about the affair to managerial officers in the company. She claimed that Romano had caused her trouble because of his seductions, and she demanded that he be punished. The company couldn't just let it slide, and Romano received a big demotion and a pay cut. With his reduced salary, he couldn't afford the rent for the apartment we were living in up until the incident and the alimony. So he moved to a cheap, dirty apartment and started working part-time on his days off to make extra money to help with paying off his debts. It wasn't going to be a good life at all. And all I can say about his situation is good riddance. How do I know how Romano's doing? Mr. and Mrs. LeCans took the trouble of coming to my new apartment to apologize and told me what had happened to him after I'd hung up the phone. They told me they would not give their son any financial support whatsoever, and they promised they would be responsible for watching over him until he paid off his alimony. I, on the other hand, have moved into a new apartment closer to work, and I'm working harder than ever. Living alone is very comfortable because I don't have to worry about the pace of household chores anymore. I'm working in an environment where I can focus more on my work, and I'm working hard to get my business to new heights. Who knows? Maybe one day soon I'll find someone else whom I can spend the rest of my life with.